Alright, so the demo for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on the Switch 2 and Xbox Series X consoles has officially dropped, and with it comes a few new interviews with the game's director, Naoki Hamaguchi, where he talks more about the porting process of getting Rebirth up and running on the Switch 2 and those streamlined progression features, including their approach to implementing them into Rebirth, and could those features show up in Remake Part 3 at launch. So, let's talk about it. Alright, so starting off first with that demo information, Square Enix has officially dropped a very generous and beefy demo of Rebirth on the Switch 2 and Xbox Series X, which allows you to play through all of chapters 1 and 2, which starts off with that Nibelheim flashback and ends with the battle with the Midgard Zormer. It's pretty cool that Square's been doing this for the past few years, allowing people to play pretty big chunks of games to see if this is something that they would be into, and considering going from Remake to Rebirth is a bit of an adjustment since you're now in an open zone and you get to explore so much. This should be a good litmus test for a lot of people to decide whether or not they want to hop on the Rebirth train. Now, when it comes to performance aspects of the Switch 2 version of Rebirth, the demo has been receiving some mixed reviews so far, with some people saying that while combat is super smooth, never drops in frame rate, there are frame rate drops within the more densely populated areas, specifically within Calm, sometimes dropping as low as 19 frames per second, which really sucks, but that's also to be expected because the fact that they even got Remake and Rebirth up and running on a Switch 2 is just insane. And there are some reported issues again with the texture stuff, which I was, full on expecting. Even the PS5 version of Rebirth had issues with textures, where on the Switch 2 version, they're saying that when you get close up, it's very clear that those textures are lower res, which again is to be expected. It's the Switch 2. It's not going to be as powerful as a PC or a PlayStation 5. And while those issues are worrisome, I think it's important to remember that this is a demo, which means that it's probably from a much older build of the game. So I would hope that the frame rate issues, maybe some of those texture issues have been alleviated for the full release, which is what I would assume. Based on what Hamaguchi and the team have been saying so far, it seems like they found a really good sweet spot to get that game running smoothly on the Switch 2. So while those are concerns, again, it's a demo. It's probably an older build. But if you're someone out there who has a Switch 2 and you're playing the demo, let me know in the comments what you think so far. Is there anything that you like? Are there concerns that you have? I'm very curious to see how this game ends up running as a finished product on the Switch 2. And what's nice is that, of course, all of your save data and progress will carry over from the demo into the full game. Now, moving over to those interviews, our first one comes from Andrew Agress of The Outer Haven, who sat down with Hamaguchi to talk more about the Switch 2 port of Rebirth. And they start off by asking Hamaguchi, since Remake was considered a miracle port for the Switch 2, did they have any concerns when porting Rebirth over to the Switch 2? Hamaguchi goes on to say, "To be honest, I did have concerns. Compared to Remake, Rebirth is more open, with a much larger scale of fields and heavier processing loads. At first, we were very cognizant of the questions surrounding whether we could truly make the experience work on the Switch 2, which assumes handheld play. As development progressed, however, we were able to gain confidence in how much we could achieve with the right amount of ingenuity, and leverage the optimization insights we gained through Remake as we reassessed our rendering techniques, lighting, and background streaming for Rebirth. Ultimately, this process wasn't about pulling off a miracle, but rather about fleshing out ideas on how we could make the experience work until the very end. Undergoing this process made it very clear that we could achieve the same thing for the third installment." So again, what Hamaguchi is saying here, I don't think it's lies or fluff. It is kind of more reassuring to the final product of Rebirth on Switch 2 running much better. Because again, they really have been taking their time to try and optimize these games the best they can. And to throw back to an Automaton interview we covered with Hamaguchi a few months ago, he walked everyone through the process of how they construct these games and how they port. So essentially what they do is they never downscale something on all platforms just because a Switch 2, for example, might not have the CPU power that a PC does. They look at each hardware, all of its weaknesses, all of its strengths, and then they just kind of go from there and look at where the ceiling is for the CPU or the GPU, and then they just kind of optimize the game for that platform. And with that comes reassessing CPU stuff, NPC density. How is the lighting going to work? How can we improve it? Which is cool. That's something that they figured out for Remake and Rebirth. And Hamaguchi's like, yeah, we had some cool lighting improvements, and now we're going to bring that back over to the PS5, which is pretty sick. So their approach essentially was, instead of, okay, we have to pull a miracle here, it was basically, okay, let's look at the strengths and weaknesses and just kind of go from there, which is reassuring. But again, crossing my fingers that the final product runs a lot better than the demo is currently. Up next, they asked Hamaguchi about releasing Remake so soon after Remake officially went multi-platform. Hamaguchi says, "One of the biggest motivations was that we didn't want the excitement of those who played Remake on the Switch 2 to end there. This project was designed as a trilogy, so if too much time passes between entries, the experience would inevitably feel fragmented. We wanted to avoid that. Furthermore, another big point was that from a development standpoint, the foundation and insights we gained from porting Remake on the Switch 2 carried over directly to Rebirth. Because of this decision didn't feel rushed. It simply felt like the right move at the right time." Which is smart. Again, learning a lot from porting Remake and taking those lessons and applying them to Rebirth probably did shorten development time, or at least the porting time, significantly. But also, this is a much bigger issue that Square Enix has been dealing with the Final Fantasy series in particular, where it just takes too damn long for a lot of these games to come out. You throw all the way back to Final Fantasy XIII, and that came out in 2009. And it wouldn't be until 2016 when we would get the next mainline entry into the Final Fantasy franchise with 15. And then it wouldn't be until 2023 until we got Final Fantasy XVI. So it takes quite a while for a lot of these games to come out. And for years, Square Enix was really just fumbling a lot of their development, 15 in particular. I love that game. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I love the Royal Edition. I loved what we ended up with. I can't imagine a world where I didn't experience that version of the game. But it also had a very troubled development cycle where they changed directors, and a lot of stuff changed from Versus 13 to eventually becoming the 15th entry into the Final Fantasy franchise. But this is something that the developers at Square Enix know. Yoshi P, Naoki Hamaguchi have been pretty vocal about, like, yeah, we want to consistently get our games out there, try and streamline the progression of making these games faster, but still maintaining quality, because we don't want to lose interests in what we're doing here. And there was a study that came out a little while back that examined the average age of players from specific franchises. And for Final Fantasy, I believe the average player age was 40. It may have been 42. And everyone started clowning on Final Fantasy and Square Enix, the developers, and even the players, saying, like, this is an unk game. This is a game for unks. Apparently I'm an unk now. But no one paid attention to the rest of the study. If you looked at Resident Evil, its average player age was 38. Legend of Zelda was, I believe, 35. And Pokemon was 32. And these are franchises that have been around for a very long time, 30 plus years. It would make sense that the average player base for these older franchises does skew older. So that's not really shocking there, and I'm not really quite sure why Square Enix got the brunt of the force there. But acknowledgement there, you do want to build up your base and have a younger generation show interest in these games too, because it helps the longevity and the health of these games and helps bolster the fan base. And by getting your games out quicker, being much more consistent, and allowing people to be, oh, a new Final Fantasy came out, I know what to expect from that. And then maybe 2.5, 3 years later, another Final Fantasy comes out and it's like, oh, I know what to expect from that. But ensuring that the quality is there is very important. So I think they're in a situation where they're starting to figure that out, Hamaguchi and the team specifically. You look at the development of this remake project, barring the, weird years from 2015 to 2019, Hamaguchi and the team have been pretty quick with getting these games out, and they've been pretty consistent. And when it comes to growing your fan base, again, this is anecdotal, but I tend to see a lot of people who are on the younger side discovering Final Fantasy for the first time. I just came across a content creator by the name of Krissy. I believe she goes by Krissy on Twitch, which is adorable. But she started playing Final Fantasy VII Remake for the first time this year, and she's having a blast. Seeing each playthrough she uploads, each episode, how she's warming up more to the story and the characters, especially the combat. To see someone who actually is utilizing the combat and switching characters, reading character abilities. If there's something she doesn't understand, she'll go into the tutorial and read what, that thing might be. And by the third episode, she's running around the slums and she's humming the music. And at that point, I'm like, the game's got her. It's got its hooks in her. She's having a blast. So there's always new people discovering Final Fantasy. And I think slowly over time, I think the fan base will start to get bigger, assuming Square Enix can, be much more consistent with how they release these games. And I'm filming this video on April 28th, just a few days away from the beginning of May. And I think May is when the start of Part 3 stuff could start happening, specifically leading into June with Summer Game Fest and hopefully getting a reveal trailer at that event for Remake Part 3. Maybe we could start getting some teases in May that lead to that, which is, wishful thinking. Up next, they ask Hamaguchi about those streamlined progression features, their philosophy behind them, and could they show up in future Remake projects, i.e. Remake Part 3. Hamaguchi goes on to say, "We're planning to implement the streamlined progression feature introduced in this Switch 2 versions to other platforms, including PC and PS5. The reason is simple. We believe that the essence of the experience should remain consistent regardless of where you play. In truth, we saw significant positive reception to porting Remake since the launch of the Switch 2, which gave us a strong sense of confidence as developers. Some players want to sit down while they play, while others want to experience the game over shorter stretches of time. Today, we feel it's necessary to leave room for players to choose what fits their lifestyle best. We're positively considering implementation for future titles too, but are planning to carefully determine whether we should implement them from launch or provide them as updates based on player reception." Which again, I think is a smart approach, just allowing people to play a game the way that they want to play. Obviously, there is the developer intended vision of how they want you to play the game, but allowing someone to sit down and turn on a streamlined progression feature and allow them to just kind of comfortably pass through combat stuff and maybe some of the bigger boss battles. Maybe you're people who, want to experience the story and maybe they're a little rusty on the gameplay end, so they can kind of just jump in and have fun and be able to experience all that stuff. Or one of my favorite features, sometimes I get my butt whooped in a boss fight on hard mode and I have to replay it. I don't always want to sit through the cutscene, I just want to get right back into it. You can fast forward that stuff. So there's some nice quality of life features there that I really like, and I think allowing the player to approach how they want to play the game is important. And that's something that Hamaguchi will touch on in another interview that we'll get to very shortly. But when it comes to Remake Part 3, do you implement progression stuff, the streamlined progression features from the get-go? I don't think you do. And I think that's because Remake Part 3 is going to play differently, which I'll expand upon more once we jump over to the next interview. But I am very curious about how someone plays this game on a Switch 2. What do they think of the pacing? Are they someone who's going to sit and play docked? Are they going to just pull out their Switch 2, play a little bit, put it away? I'm very curious to see how that affects the flow of gameplay, its pacing, and the structure, and what people think of that. Alright, if you've made it this far into the video and you like what you hear, I would really appreciate it if you guys could click the like button. And if you want to keep up with more news style videos like this, or video essays, Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, fighting game stuff, you can subscribe as well. Doing any one of those things is greatly appreciated and really helps out the channel a ton. Now, speaking of streamlined progression, we're going to learn a little bit more about Hamaguchi and the team's approach and philosophy behind how they implemented that into Rebirth, and this interview comes to us from Azario Lopez of Noisy Pixel. And it turns out that one of the reasons why they implemented the streamlined progression stuff into Rebirth is because of the sheer volume of content, and they acknowledged that could probably be very overwhelming to a lot of new players. Hamaguchi would go on to say, "As we work toward delivering a long-form experience across a trilogy, we gradually realized that the sheer volume of the game could become a barrier for some players. And this was something that they didn't think of from the get-go. It's something that just kind of happened later, because it was something that he and the team were thinking about when it came to how people actually approach these large-scale RPGs. He continues by saying, "When it comes to features like streamlined progression options and cutscene playback speed, our intention was not to reduce or shortcut the experience, but to expand the ways players can access it." He continues by saying some players want to take their time and fully immerse themselves in the story, while others want to play within more limited time constraints. Even for a AAA title, we believe there should be room to accommodate those individual play styles. So that I really appreciate. Obviously, you can't retroactively go back and change gameplay aspects or mini games or checklist stuff or exploration and Rebirth for a port. You gotta keep it the same, but adding something like streamlined progression changes how people approach that content, which again, I think is the right thing to do. Just give players options on how they want to approach things. Maybe it can help feel a little less overwhelming when they look at the overworld and they see all of the things that they can do. Now that they got the streamlined progression, maybe that's not as big of an issue. But this philosophy in particular of allowing players to approach a game the way that they want to, I think is super important. And that brings us back to Remake Part 3. And why I don't think they will implement the streamlined progression stuff from the get-go. I think that will probably hit as a later quality of life patch. And the reason I say that is because I expect exploration to be vastly different in Part 3 compared to how it was in Rebirth. And Hamaguchi has already gone on record saying that they have no intention of reducing the amount of content that was in Rebirth when going into Part 3. If anything, they'll probably add more on top of that because they want it to be a much bigger, full-fledged world, which it will be. We're going to have access to so many more regions in that game. The Highwind, the entirety of the planet is at our disposal, which means you're going to have stuff to do in all those areas. But how do you make it so where it's not overwhelming? Because a lot of people, when they played Rebirth, they open up that map, they see the checklist, and they're like, oh crap. There is a lot of stuff to do. I feel verklempt. I'm overwhelmed. Where do I go first? There's so many icons. I don't want to miss out on anything. It creates that FOMO of missing out on a quest line or an item, which then leads to burnout and exhaustion, which I felt when I played on my first playthrough. It was after Cosmo Canyon. By the time I got to Nibelheim, I'm like, oof, I'm feeling a little burned down. But I think the devs had kind of took that into consideration because you get to Nibelheim and it's a much smaller area and there's a lot less to do there. So it's a little bit more relaxing of an environment compared to what came prior. So how do you change that approach for Part 3? Again, I think the simplest solution is you keep the amount of content there that you had in Rebirth. Obviously you'll add more, but you just throw it out into the world, right? You don't have a map with a checklist and all these different icons on where you can go and what you can collect and what does what. Just put all that stuff out into the world and allow the player to approach it how they see fit. Because if you don't see that there's a ton of content out there, you're not going to feel that overwhelming sense of pressure and FOMO of, I need to explore everything. Or I need to go here and then do this, and this, and oh, I missed this out on the checklist and I gotta go back and do that. And again, I don't think we'll have a Chadley guiding us. It will be us, the party, because that's what this trilogy has been building up to. Remake being very linear, Rebirth opening things up a lot with open zones, and Chadley kind of guiding you throughout these regions on how to explore them, what's around there. And then Part 3 is, okay, we're not gonna hold your hand, we're not gonna give you Chadley, go out and do things the way you wanna do it. Which I think is what they'll do for Part 3, which again just kind of is a big callback to the original FF7. Nothing was really marked on the map. It was up to the player to run around and discover things, and I think that's the most fun way to explore. It's just that sense of adventure and whimsy and, oh look, I found a cave over there. I wonder what's in there, instead of, oh, there's a cave on my map that has this, 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 and this. That's not as fun. So I think just allowing players to just kind of explore, maybe you miss out on stuff, maybe you don't. But that's what the internet is for. That's what walkthroughs and guides on YouTube are for. If you really want to investigate everything, there are ways to do it. And again, I've made this comparison before, so apologies for being a broken record, but I loved how Ghost of Yotei handled their side quests, their exploration, and their world interaction, because they took a very similar approach where all of the side stuff, all of the in-game content, it was already out there in the world from the start of the game. If you wanted to just go out and explore and come across something organically, you could do that. But if you wanted to go to a nearby village and stop at their bulletin board and see what side quests were there, whether they were bounties or someone needed help, you could do that too. So giving the player options on how they approach all of the content that's in the game, I think is the best approach. Because there will be those people that do like the checklisty stuff. They like knowing what they need to do, where they need to go. Maybe they're limited on time and don't have a ton of time to devote to playing a game, so they want to know where everything is at. But the people that just want to explore, have that sense of whimsy and adventure, they can do that too. Maybe you're someone who does both. I'm someone who, when I play these games, I am scouring every corner of a map to make sure I don't miss out on anything. Because that's a lot of fun to me, and you end up coming across some really cool surprises. So that's how I think they'll approach the exploration and content stuff in Part 3, and that's why I think the streamlined progression stuff probably won't be available at launch. That'll probably hit at a much later date. And to end the video, I wanted to throw in a fun little tidbit and fact from the Rebirth Ultimania in regards to that battle with Rude and Elena in the Mithril Mines in Rebirth. And this comes to us via the Shinra Archaeology Department over on Blue Sky. Rebirth lead boss battle designer Kazuo Hori, I hope I pronounced that properly, says Elena's Elena Knuckle attack is based on an event that takes place during the original game in Icicle Inn, which we haven't yet visited. He's glad the team was able to slip in the move ahead of time, which I think is a nice little Easter egg. It's a nice callback to the Icicle Inn where she attempts to hit you. If you dodge it properly, she just goes rolling down the hill, which is a really funny scene in the OG game. But what's even cooler is that I haven't been able to replicate this myself. If I can find a video of someone doing it, I'll put it in the video and, credit them. But when you're fighting Rude and Elena on the ledge, if you position yourself right on the edge of the ledge and you manage to dodge the Elena Knuckle, she will go flying off of the ledge, land on the ground, and then have to make her way all the way back up a set of stairs to help Rude, which I think is hilarious. Also, if you manage to line things up properly, you can get Elena to hit Rude with the Elena Knuckle, launching him in the air, which is hilarious. So not only is that a cool Easter egg gameplay thing, it actually fits with the theme of Rebirth where they have story stuff that inspires the gameplay. And what I mean by that is Elena is a Turk. She's incredibly skilled, but she's also still really new, which means she's going to be a little green in some areas, which we do see throughout Rebirth. So she might make some mistakes here and there, and the fact that she can miss the Elena Knuckle, go off the ledge, or hit Rude, I think fits with her character and is pretty funny. So with that being said, that is the video. I am Curious Corduroy. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of what we covered in today's video. If you're someone who has a Switch 2, have you played the demo for Rebirth on it, and what's your experience been like so far? And how do you think they'll handle the exploration stuff in Remake Part 3? I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.